We're at Port Townsend Film Festival, the 14th annual Port Townsend Film Festival 2013. I'm Larry Stein, the program director of our Port Townsend radio station KPTC. I got the chance to watch some films this year and had the privilege of interviewing some of the filmmakers. And I get a chance now to introduce Christopher Carson Smith, who is the featured person in this film. He's the director or co-director of this film called Tiny, A Story About Living Small. And Tiny, when we talk about Tiny, we're talking about housing Tiny. We're talking about you building your own house.
That's right.
What was your goal in going small in terms of building your own house?
Well, I actually set out to build this house because I'd had a lifelong dream about building my own house with my own hands, and it's specifically in the mountains. And so I bought some land, and when I set out to build it and started doing some research, I wanted to do something really small and manageable. But when I called my local building office, it turned out that there are minimum square footage requirements in most counties, specifically in this county, and so I couldn't actually build the house I wanted to. So
because it was too small for their codes, for their...
It was too small. So it triggered a memory I had about people who live in these tiny houses on wheels. I read in a magazine, and I put it together that by actually going a little smaller and putting it on wheels, it sort of circumnavigates those laws, because if it's on a trailer, then normal building codes don't apply.
So you're, but it's not just you. What's interesting is you sort of tapped into a stream of thought that's going on around us. I mean, you did this film, you did this project, and it was your idea of building a tiny house. The reality caused you to put it on wheels, but I think you found that there are people all around the country doing this, all around the world doing this.
Definitely. And well, the first idea of the film came actually when my co-director Miranda Mueller decided to, I was looking for a film project, and she recommended, and she's also, involved in the story of building the house, so she's also one of the characters of the film, and suggested that maybe, this was a good project to make a film about. And then I kind of agreed, but I thought, well, you got a lot of the vision here, so why don't, you come on board, and we started doing it together. So then we started looking at what to include in that, and we did realize that there was a really growing movement of people, and there are blogs everywhere on the internet that really capture people's stories about their own process of downsizing, building a tiny house. Mm-hmm. And we use that for inspiration for our build project, but also as a way to reach out to that community and include them as these stories and little vignettes in the film.
Well, what's nice is in the film you have snippets of interviews with people all over the country who are doing the same kind of thing, and you've interviewed people who actually have blogs and follow this movement. Yeah. So you've really broadened it out beyond your little project to this, what you encountered now as doing this project as a movement.
Indeed, yeah, and the reason partially was that, we wanted to make this film out that's kind of an issue film, but we didn't want to approach it from the perspective of this is a problem and this is a solution, like massive homes are our problem, because we don't necessarily believe that, and we thought people wouldn't be open to hearing that the way that they're living is, a problem, because it's not necessarily, and for some people it makes sense. But what we thought would be really interesting is to show people and hear their stories about why they downsized and how it's improved their life, instead of coming at it from a negative approach, coming at it from this positive one, and just showing what's possible.
What's possible. So how long did it take you to build the house that we watched in the film?
It would, well, I don't want to give away,
okay.
I don't want to spoil anything,
okay.
But
it won't give away it's not a cliffhanger though.
It's not a cliffhanger, but let's just say it took a little bit longer than I had anticipated setting up, but it's not as easy to build a tiny house as you might think, because it's the same exact process as building a bigger house. You just use a little bit less wood, and so it's maybe a little quicker, but not dramatically.
And you have to think through, what we see in the film is you have to think through all the complicated aspects of what you need in a house, need in a place to live. I think your solutions for storage and for using every bit of available space are kind of ingenious when we watch you discover those.
Cool. Thanks, and I appreciate that, but I did borrow heavily from the community of tiny house people online, and it's just, got to learn what worked and what didn't work from other people sharing their experiences. And now we're kind of doing that, but hopefully for a much larger audience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's part of a communication about this, part of a lot of people thinking about this and talking about this, and you don't have to reinvent everything yourself.
Right.
It's totally legitimate to go to the other people who are doing it and learn from each other.
Definitely. You know, and the tiny house community itself, you know, learns from other places. You know, like green builders. There's a green building community, and they're like, you know, slightly different. It actually seems, and then there's you know, traditional building and like yurts and things like that, and sort of borrowing aspects of what's worked for a long time for some, you know, cultures or civilizations, and like incorporating elements of that into the designs that that tiny house people are building these days. So.
You go into this project, I think as we watch you start building this house, you admit that you really didn't have a lot of building experience to begin with, right?
That's correct, yeah.
So you were learning as you were doing it.
Yep, and I think that contributed to how long my house took to build in the end, was because, you know, I was really committed to doing everything that I could myself, and I did almost everything with the exception of the installation, because I don't have access to or the knowledge to work the equipment to blow in foam insulation. But so every step, you know, required a step of learning and researching how to do it, and then there was sourcing the materials, and then there was actually doing it. So, you know, I would, it probably pretty much doubled the amount of time to do anything that if I had been a more experienced construction person and just knew how to do, or knew what came next, they probably would have done it, you know, twice as fast.
It always takes longer when you're learning how to do it. Where physically did you build most of the house? Because I know it's on wheels, so it got moved. Where did you build it?
So what's interesting about sort of doing the house build and making the film is that we had to sort of take some things into consideration other tiny house builders don't. And so you know, when I was looking for a place to build it, there were some options, but they just weren't very picturesque. And so I kind of kept that in mind a little bit, because, you know, I wanted to make an inspiring, beautiful film, and like building a tiny house in an old lumber yard, it just wasn't gonna offer that same sort of aesthetic.
And you succeeded in finding some beautiful locations to being around Boulder, Colorado,
Yeah.
You don't have too much of a problem finding beautiful locations.
Yeah, you point the camera in pretty much any direction. It's pretty. And yeah, so we ended up building it in Boulder, Colorado. Actually, a really old friend of mine, his mother had an old house, but it had like a big piece of farmland behind it. So they were growing wheat that year, and I was building the house, and there was like a pretty scene where the harvesting combine comes by, and that was a good way to sort of mark the passage of time. You know, as the wheat field grew and then became harvested and was laying fallow, you could kind of see, in a very visual sense, the time pass.
That's a wonderful aspect of the film, is seeing the seasons pass as you're working on this house. And the project goes on and the seasons change.
Yeah.
How long have you actually lived in the house now at this point, now that well, actually, when was the film finished?
Well, we finished building the house, we started building the house in, I guess you'll find out how long it took. We started building the house in...
I was just curious when you actually finished it.
Oh, finished it. Well, it took it, yeah, so we finished it in May of 2012. And then we did post-production for about a year. So, and during that time, we were actually living in New York, and our composer was there, and our sound designer, and one of the elements of the story is that Moret has always had a dream to move to New York, and that was kind of her following her dream. So we went there to do post-production.
And we hear that in the film. She talks about that in the film.
Right. So, yeah. And then so I came back to Colorado in June and moved the house back to Boulder, and now I'm living in the house.
So you've been living in the house itself for how long?
About 4 months, full time. But we visited it quite a bit in that intervening years. So.
Are you living there by yourself or with somebody?
I'm there by myself at the moment. Moret is still in Brooklyn, and we're still traveling around to film festivals and things. So
what's the feeling after actually living there? The building's done. You're living there for 4 months.
Great question. It's very nice and very calming, and you know, the size hasn't really been a problem for me at all. There are some aspects that take some getting used to, and they take more work to do. You know, I don't have a washer and dryer, so I'm going to the laundromat. And I didn't build my house with running water because the land I intended initially to be on didn't have a well or water. So those kind of things have been a little bit of an adjustment, but you know, honestly, it's nice to kind of come back to this more basic kind of, you know, way of living that we kind of have forgotten, and everything's on autopilot now.
Yeah, now the house is on a set of wheels. It's on the flatbed of a trailer, basically, right?
Yes.
But yet you set it, once you get it in place, you set it on posts of some sort that keep it anchored.
It pretty much stays on its trailer on the wheels, but there are some jacks that are mounted on the corners that I kind of crank up and level it with, and yeah, you just park it in and just kind of set it up, and it's good to go.
So now coming from Boulder, you of course now have to deal with the devastation from the torrential rains and flooding in Boulder. Tell us how you kind of worked around that and survived that.
Yeah, so a few days ago there was a massive flood in Boulder, and lots of people's houses were destroyed, especially if they lived near any rivers or creeks. And even people who didn't, they kind of just ended up getting water they never expected. But the tiny house actually now sits on top of a hill right outside of Boulder. So I basically I have a really great view, but I could kind of see what was going on down there, but I wasn't affected by it at all. So it made it through really well, and there's no leaks or anything. It's bone dry. It just was nice and cozy. And I was on the internet and blogging and things.
How do you have internet connection how do you have internet connection out there?
Well, the place it's at now is actually on somebody's property, and they have wireless, and I can actually get it from the things. Yeah.
So first-time film, first-time house builder.
Right.
There are parallels about learning on both ends, learning and doing. Are you going to continue making films?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if I'll continue doing two massive projects at the same time, because that almost killed me and Marette. Actually, we both had a challenging time trying to do both those and work. And but yeah, I have some projects in the work, and I'm currently working as an editor on another bigger film for somebody.
So do you have film training? Did you actually go to school?
I did years and years ago, but I took 6 or 7 years off and went back to school for something completely unrelated.
So, as we often think, those of us who work in media, you think, oh, I can't make a living in that, so I have to get a real job. And then you go back to what you really love, which is making films.
Yeah, and that's what I do for my job now. So it's been working out. Yeah.
Wonderful, great that you can find a way to do something you really love and find a way to survive on it.
Yeah,
that's a wonderful connection.
Totally. It'd be nice to not just survive but thrive. I'm working on that stuff now.
You're young. So, the finish. There's an interesting aspect in building this house that you point out in the film is the sourcing of the materials, the sourcing of the woods, and you use interesting sources for woods, and you sort of know the story of the wood in this section of the building and in that section. Yeah. Tell me about obtaining the materials to build this house.
Yeah, that was a really interesting part. I'm an environmentalist, and for me, building small was initially about having a less impact on the land. And so one of the ways I wanted to do that was to incorporate reclaimed materials, including wood. And so we found an old barn that had been destroyed, and they were selling the wood on Craigslist. And we got one of the walls was that. A lot of the wood was beetle kill pine, which is a side product of the pine beetle infestation in the Rocky Mountains, which is a result of climate change. So it's a way to thin out the forests and prevent forest fires. They have to do that anyway, so you can use that wood. It has a beautiful blue stain to it.
So wood that is killed by this beetle kill actually has another purpose in it. It isn't burned or shredded as scrap. It can be used in building.
Yep.
And it has a beautiful look to it.
It has a beautiful look, and it's actually just a little bit cheaper too. So there's a lot of good benefits to you.
So the whole area, not only building tiny, but using unconventional materials. What used to be unconventional materials, but now they're getting to become the regular materials that builders use, and it becomes a positive feature of contemporary building.
Yeah.
And you're right. In fact, you mentioned getting barnwood. I know that sometimes it's tough to get that barnwood. When somebody tears down a barn, there are a lot of builders going after it.
Yep. It's very popular these days, and that's great. That's kind of what we're trying to do with our film too, is popularize living in a way that's sustainable.
Well, we have to wrap it up. I've been speaking with Christopher Carson Smith, who with Marette Mueller directed and appeared in and were everything of this film, Tiny, a story about living small, screening at the Port Townsend Film Festival 2013. I'm Larry Stein from radio station KPTC in Port Townsend. Thank you, Christopher, for talking with me. It's been fun.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you.